Good morning, everyone. So today we are going to discuss about mastering discourse markers. How do we master discourse markers? Is it essential for us to use discourse markers during our day-to-day conversations and especially in the formal writings? Yes, it is very important because we need to pay attention to cohesion, coherence, and clarity. Let's see how to master the discourse markers. What are discourse markers? The words or phrases that help us in organizing, connecting, or signaling the relationship between two different ideas. They help the listener or the reader follow the argument or your story. Examples, however, therefore, on the other hand, in fact, similarly, meanwhile, to be honest, in other words, etc. Let's see why are they important. Of course, as mentioned earlier, to create coherence and logical flow, make writing and speech sound very natural and fluent. Let's also think it in academic and formal way. It is very useful in academic essays, presentations, reports, and discussions. Let's see the categories of discourse markers. Number one, addition. So if we need to add two different ideas together, we use these discourse markers. Moreover, furthermore, in addition, besides. For example, I learn Hindi besides learning French. So in addition to learning something, I learned the other thing as well. And second category is contrast. We use these words like however, on the other hand, whereas, nevertheless to indicate the contrast ideas in one sentence. For example, it was a rainy day, however, we continued playing. The third category is cause or effect. The words that are used, therefore, consequently, as a result, hence. I was very thirsty, therefore, I gulped the water. So there is a cause and effect. We connect it by using these discourse markers. And examples. If we want to illustrate something with examples, we use these discourse markers to connect the examples and the main idea of the passage or the speech. For instance, for example, namely, such as, etc. And to indicate the time or sequence of a process, we use certain words like firstly, initially, now, meanwhile, afterwards, subsequently. And what about the reformulation? Like we want to reiterate certain ideas again, and we use these discourse markers. In other words, that is to say, to put it simply. And then when we want to wrap up our speech or a write up, we casually say these discourse markers to sum up, to conclude, in conclusion, overall, finally, etc. So these categories of discourse markers must be noted very carefully because when two ideas are given to you and when there is a question or when there is a point where you need to connect these two different ideas by using the discourse markers, you need to know the connection between these two sentences so as to know which category of discourse markers to be used. So it is important for any learner to memorize these categories and few examples of the discourse markers that is given here. Let's move on to the next slide. Usage in context. For example, on screen you see one correct version, the other one is an incorrect version. We can even say it's not incorrect, but it is the more appropriate way of telling it. For example, he was tired, he continued working. So these are the two different sentences which are totally related to each other, but in what way? In contrast, yes. So we use the discourse marker nevertheless and connect these two sentences. So what is the correct form? He was tired, nevertheless, he continued working. So he didn't mind being tired, he was continuously working hard. So this contrast ideas put together by using the word nevertheless, or we can supplement however, in contrast, and all that. And look at the second example. It was raining, we went out. So here again, there is a contrast idea because if it rains, we generally stay put. But here, it was raining, we went out. The relationship between these two different ideas of the two sentences is again contradictory. So we are using some other discourse marker here. Although it was raining, we still went out. Or although it was raining, we went out. So both are right. Let's look into the common mistakes that we do when we use the discourse markers. One, overusing the discourse markers. And number two, using informal discourse markers, especially in academic writing and even during the class hours, lecture hours, speeches. We tend to use like, and other Gen Z words that can be substituted to fill the gap between one idea and the other idea. So, if we are learning to use these discourse markers appropriately, we may not be in need of these unnecessary fillers. Yes. So the third common mistake, starting every sentence with a marker, which is definitely not necessary. Sometimes in between two sentences, we can use the markers like discourse markers. So one tip is that use it very naturally and based on your choice. Let's look into the exercises. It helps us recap and understand in a better manner. She worked very hard blank, she didn't get the promotion. So here it's not cause and effect, it's again something that's contradictory. So I'm supplying however. She worked very hard, however, she didn't get the promotion. You try to supply some other word other than however. Yes, I suppose you got certain answers. Look into the second one. Blank. The government should take action immediately. Overall, the government should take action immediately. So you can even supply some other discourse markers that would be appropriate for this blank. Try it out. Yes, I hear your lots and lots of discourse markers that would be appropriate here to sum up, finally, to conclude. Yes. Next, look into the third last example here. Dash, I would like to thank all of you for your support. Firstly, I'd like to thank all of you for your support. So, this is my way of dealing the sequence. I might start by telling or expressing gratitude to everybody, but naturally, we always use it at the end. So, we can say, finally, I'd like to thank you all for your support. So, it depends again on the perception of every user or learner. Now look into these exercises. He was poor, he was honest. Again, two different contradictory ideas joined together. He was poor, nevertheless, he was honest. The data was inconsistent. We revised the model. So here it is the cause and effect. The data was inconsistent, therefore, we revised the model. Let's look at the third one. Dash, I disagree with your point. Personally, I disagree with your point. And look into the last one. I love reading novels. Dash. I enjoy poetry. So here, maybe it's in addition category. I love reading novels. In addition, I enjoy poetry. Another example, I love having coffee. In addition, I enjoy tea. So it means that I can enjoy both the hot drinks. And look at the third type of exercise. we have certain error and we have to identify and correct the errors. Nevertheless, since it was raining, we went swimming. Here, unnecessary usage of two discourse markers. Probably the right answer is since it was raining, we went swimming. Furthermore, I didn't like the movie, but it was too long. So here again, unnecessary usage of furthermore and but. So I didn't like the movie. Furthermore, it was too long. The third one, on the other hand, he didn't study hard and got good marks. Again, he didn't study hard. On the other hand, he got good marks. So the contradiction can be expressed by using on the other hand. Yes. So there is 3 or 4 points on screen. Let's call it a paragraph and let's just read it once and see how discourse markers can completely change the outlook of the passage. Global warming is a serious issue. The government has taken some measures. These measures are not sufficient. Citizens must contribute to reducing pollution. So this is a very appropriate paragraph, but something is missing. What is it? It's nothing but the discourse markers. Now look into it. Global warming is a serious issue. Although the government has taken some measures, these are not sufficient. Therefore, citizens must also contribute to reducing pollution. Now, this is a complete passage with the appropriate discourse markers. So, listeners and learners, let's summarize. Discourse markers create connections between ideas, it gives us the logical flow, and it makes us use the appropriately right word depending on the context and tone. Of course, if it's a very casual conversation, we use yes to sum it up, finally, like that, like some other informal connectives. But again, it should not be very informal and it should not affect the flow of the speech. And of course, you vary them based on the fluency and sophistication of the situation. And now I conclude with a reflection task because writing or even presenting a paragraph on the importance of critical thinking in education. Yes, anybody can make that now, that too with the help of AI, but consciously try to use at least 5 discourse markers that we learned today and try to draft the passage either in the written form or as a speech man. Yes, so give us the comment on how you learned to use discourse markers as an advanced learner and how are you evolving with the learning of English language with respect to discourse markers. Thank you, everyone.